Good morning everybody, welcome back to our latest video cast series. I'm here on the Hungry Rock Road near Coolaney, and for those of you who are local you'll know what I mean, and if you've just joined us again, well, you'll get used to seeing me in strange places. Perhaps you're wondering what I'm doing here in the middle of nowhere sitting on a camping stool, but hope that will become clear as we proceed. Now, the Hungry Rock Road, you've often wondered perhaps how it got its name. Well, the Hungry Rock Road, it winds from the N59 and ends up in the village of Coolaney. And again, to my left here, a few hundred metres down, is the Glenwood Forest Park. Camping area to my right is the Hawks Rock and the village of Coolaney. I used to think that the Hungry Rock Road was named after the Hawks Rock, the big outcrop here, but that's not the case. The Hungry Rock Road is named here because of this nondescript slab of rock that I'm sitting on presently to the side of the rock. The Hungry Rock Road. Well, again, you've wondered how the Hungry Rock Road got its name. Well, we're going back to a very dark chapter in Irish history called Moor, or the Great Famine. You know, the Great Famine was from 1845 to approximately 1849, and it claimed the lives of over 1 million people in Ireland here. Another million left Ireland to seek a better life elsewhere. They reckon the population was decimated by about 25%. And back then the peasants and the Irish peasantry, they grew many potatoes on their little allotments. There was a stable diet, the stable crop. It was calorie dense, it was nutritious, it grew well in Irish soil, and the Irish people were, I guess, over dependent perhaps upon the potato. But when the potato blight disease struck Europe, the Irish population suffered greatly. And again, it's called the Hungry Rock Road here because around this area back then, many people died because of the famine back in those ancient, those sad times back then. But you've maybe seen, as you've moved around the country, different areas, you've seen famine graveyards, or you've seen deserted villages. And again, these are all grim relics of that sad chapter, the past in Irish history. Now, I want to turn please to two Bible verses and read them together. John chapter 6 and verse 35 is the first one, and Jesus Christ speaks here. He said, "And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst." Now again, we'll turn to Romans please, the letter of Paul to the Romans chapter 5 and verse 12. And Paul speaks there, he says, "Wherefore as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned." So much for the Great Famine and the Hungry Rock and Moor. But as we think about it together, there's two things we can think about: hunger and death. You know, I hope there's nobody listening to me here, and I don't know, there may be, but that you suffer from hunger. We're thankful to be living in Ireland where there still is an abundance of food, but we're thinking of hunger and we're thinking of death. And in these verses too, we're thinking of hunger and we're thinking of death. Jesus says here in John chapter 6 verse 35, "I am the bread of life." Now what did he mean there? You see, he's not speaking about something physical that you can take and assimilate into yourself that gives you life. He's speaking here metaphorically. He's speaking in picture language. Jesus said in another place, "I am the door." He didn't mean he was a physical door. Jesus said, "I am the light of the world." He didn't mean he was a physical light. He's speaking here in picture language. He said, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes on me will never thirst." You see, it takes my mind back to Jeremiah, which is a book in the Old Testament, and God speaks there to a nation called Israel, and he says they had forsaken him, and it says they have, to quote it correctly, God says, "You have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and you have carved yourself out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water." And back then, in that dry, arid land, when the rains came, the people would have gathered that precious rain water in carved wooden boxes. But the problem was the rock was porous, and little by little the water seeped out. You might have had a full basin on Monday, by Thursday it was nearly gone. You would hardly see it, but it leaked out little by little. And you know, as I think about that verse, that's a bit like you and I, if we're trying to find satisfaction in pursuits of life or hobbies or careers, it'll never work. Stuff will never fully satisfy us. You see, I think about Hebrews chapter 11 and a man called Moses there. Moses was a Jewish boy. He was in the basket by the Nile, found by Pharaoh's daughter, and he grew up in the palace, and he would have been heir to the throne. And he looked about on all the wealth of Egypt, the gold and the silver, and he said himself, the pleasures of sin, they're but for a season. He viewed all he saw as being temporary. Yes, it brought pleasure, it brought happiness, but it only lasted for a certain amount of time. And so it is with no matter what we pursue in life, we'll be left empty and dry and longing for more. You know, I can tell you today that if you were to be saved and have God's salvation, your hunger would be satisfied forever. Oh, you would still have problems in life and things don't change, but you know, your inner deep longing will be satisfied because you'll be back at one again with your Creator. You see, the problem is sin. Sin has divided us from God. And the problem was dealt with at the cross when Christ died for sin. But the onus is still up to each of us to come and repent of our sin and trust Christ. But think again before we leave it of the hunger. If you're looking for something that will satisfy you, consider again Christ and the gospel and what he said. Not now physical hunger, thankfully, or death from famine, but that hunger of the heart, that hunger of the soul. And again, Jesus said, I am the bread of life. He that comes to me will never hunger. What about dying? And we don't like to think about dying. And yet, you know, it comes, it's inevitable. We all must die. Somebody has said there's two things that we can't avoid, death and taxes. We all must die. And why do we die? Because, you know, our body has those inbuilt repair functions. Our cuts heal and the blood clots and the cells replace themselves. But for some reason, as we grow older, that mechanism becomes less effective. And eventually we pass away. We die physically. Well, you see, it's because of a higher law. It's because of the law of sin and death, if you like, that scientists and biologists or chemists will never solve. You know, you've heard about cryonics perhaps, and people freeze their bodies in the hope, the vain hope, that in some way scientists of the future will find a way to rejuvenate and to give back that spark of life, that strange essence we know as life. You see, you think about a person and they die and the body is there and all the elements are still there, it's the physical body, but the life is gone. The real person is gone, you see. When we die, the real you and the real me go out to eternity. And you see, the solemn thing about the gospel is this, that in eternity, in the world to come, there's only two places, heaven or hell. And where you will be depends on what you do with Jesus Christ today. You see, Christ has a solution for hunger, and he has a solution for death, because he was the mighty conqueror over death. He rose from the grave. And I'm glad he has conquered death today. See, death really is separation. When a person physically dies, the soul and spirit are separated from the body. But you see, the Bible speaks about eternal death. And that's what you must avoid at all costs, because eternal death means to be separate from your Maker eternally in hell. You see, the gospel is not a message to make you feel good about yourself. And the gospel is not designed to somehow say that you're doing well and do a little better. No, the gospel cuts the feet out from under us all and says there's no difference, for all of sin that come short of God's glory. And it gives no credence whatsoever to our own self-efforts, our religious duties, our church attendance. You know, we're sinners. But yet the Apostle Paul, a most religious man, he came to realize this. When we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. We're helpless, we're hopeless, we're lost, we're guilty. And Christ alone can save. And I would urge you today to think about Christ, to read John's Gospel, to think about the solutions that Christ offers to hunger and dying. What a wonderful gospel. You know, in these days of worry over COVID and vaccines, etc., let's leave it all aside for a moment and let's think about the gospel of Jesus Christ and think about the wonderful solution that he offers because of his death on the cross. And the next time you're up here on the Hungry Rock Road, take a little look to your right and notice here the slab of stone. You know, it said apparently that whenever, back then there was a custom, legend has it that whenever somebody was hungry and they came along this rock road, you know, they took up a stone and they were throwing the stone on the rock, and whoever did that, so the legend says, that they were free from hunger for a year or starvation. Well, I wouldn't give much for throwing stones on a rock here, but I can tell you just now that God's salvation, it really works. And I hope you'll be saved, and I hope you'll trust Christ. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again shortly, I'm sure.